We now have our first panel. One of our panelists is already here, as you can see on screen. Dennis Ross, who we're thankful is with us, but by Zoom. We wish you refuah shlema, Dennis, we hope you feel better. Recently came down with COVID, was supposed to be here with us. We're also joined by Elliott Abrahams, another veteran U.S. diplomat, Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat, and former IDF spokesperson and Israeli diplomat Ruth Yaron. Please, ladies and gentlemen. We have to turn on the mics when we talk, and the one thing I'll ask is so Dennis can hear us, we have to make sure we speak into the microphones. This way Dennis can hear us. And now, Elliott, your fans outside are getting a little excited since our panel began. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to talk about, from Iran to Saudi Arabia and everything in between. Everything's constantly changing, as well as the ties that Israel has with the United States. And I thought, Elliott, we could start with you with something small, maybe a little inspired by the fact that there's a demonstration outside. But with the judicial reform, and Yedidia just kind of spoke about the way he's been working on it, has the fight that we have had here in Israel made Israel appear weaker in the eyes of the world from your perspective?
First, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you all for being here today. The question is too broad in the sense that I'm not sure what the impact is in, Latin America, Asia, Europe. I think there is a tendency in Israel to think that everyone is thinking about this all day long. Even American Jews are not thinking about this all day long. I do think that it has become, it is a major problem in the eyes of the most politically and socially involved Jews in the United States, in the major Jewish organizations, in Jewish congregations around the country. There, I think, yes. There is a sense, I don't know if I use the term weakness, but yes, there is a sense of, maybe I'd use the word vulnerability, that didn't exist a couple of years ago.
Okay. Thank you, Elliott. And I see there are people here holding up signs. I think that I speak on behalf of Yedidia as well, that JPPI, of course, is fully in favor of people expressing their opinion, but as long as we can maintain civility and keep this and allow our speakers to speak, that would be the best way to do this. So Ruth, I want to go to you for a second. One of the things that we've been seeing definitely in Israel, but also around the world more generally, is a decline in social cohesion. And the US, I think, is also not that different when it comes to that decline. So when a country is not stable, what can happen?
Well, first I would say, good afternoon to all of you. I'm happy to be here. But first I will start and say that I think that we are in historical time. And Israel is in front of a possibly strategic turning point. We will know only in the future looking backward. But I think that the debate going on now in Israel, and as Yedidia absolutely accurately put it, it's talking about legalities, but it's not the legal issue, which is at essence, but the democratic Jewish state of Israel, with an emphasis on each and every syllable of the democratic and Jewish state. And I think that we might look back a few years from now, at this point in time, with the demonstrator outside, with the demonstrator inside, with the fact that each and every one of us, I'm sure, in one way or another, we are involved in what's going on. Whether we are trying to reach new agreements, or whether we are speaking at a demonstration on every Saturday night, or whatever we do, we are part of it because this touches upon the core of our value and the core of who we are. The State of Israel was founded not because we needed another state in the Middle East. The State of Israel was founded as a homeland, as a homeland for the Jewish people. And from its birth, it was founded as a democratic state, which was a statement. This was not obvious way back then in that period. It was founded as a democratic state by Jews who, like my parents, came from Algeria, and myself, from Jews who came from North Africa or Eastern Europe, definitely not democratic states. And yet, this is what we've created here. Now, when we are talking about cohesiveness or social cohesiveness, which is in jeopardy right now, we are actually talking, the way I see it, as a possible hurt in the national security of the State of Israel. The national security of Israel is built on our economic and military might, definitely. But it also is building and thriving upon our social contract. Here, between the tribes of Israel, and the tribes of Israel, most of them are Jews from all sorts and walks of life. Some of them are not Jewish, but we are all Israelis. And what is happening here is that for an ancient nation, but a young country and a young state, we are still in formation. We have not reached a totally stabilized status by which we can say, this is who we are and this is who we are going to stay. 75 years of thriving, and the prospects of Israel are for thriving. But unless we take very good care, nowadays, these days, when the social contract between the Israeli society is being rewritten, but I would say not only rewritten, because there is no going back to the status quo ante. We will not go back to the compromises that maybe were solid and were good and were sufficient for the first 75 years. Looking forward to the next 75 years, to the next 750 years, we want an Israel thriving on a social contract which is made of acceptance of each other, an agreement on what do we need to live together. It has a legal aspect. It has a religious aspect. It has a national aspect. It has a military and economic aspect, and it has a huge social aspect.
Right. Okay, thank you, Ruth. Dennis, I'm going to talk into the microphone, so I'm not going to look at you at the moment, but I think you can hear me. When you think of all that we just heard from Elliott and from Ruth and everything that you know that's been going on in Israel, and maybe you're seeing also what's going on here in the room or hearing some of the noise from outside, there's also clear ramifications to the tensions we now have with the United States. And you recently weighed in a piece in Tablet about the military aid. There's been calls from the left and from the right for the U.S. to cut off military aid to Israel. As probably most people here know, Israel, under an MOU signed just under 10 years ago, receives about $3.8 billion a year. How bad today are the ties right now between Israel and Washington?
First, let me say I'm sorry I'm not there with you. I would much prefer to be there than here, but I'm, very happy to take part in the panel. I think the question's an important one because I think there's also a tendency to exaggerate the nature of how bad things might be. There are changes here for sure. The Democratic Party is not the same old Democratic Party. President Biden likes to say, this is not Scoop Jackson's Democratic Party anymore. He, by the way, is someone who is the only president who's ever called himself a Zionist. He has a kind of instinctive emotional attachment to the state of Israel. There is a reality here that within the Democratic Party, there is the progressive wing that tends to be much more sensitive to the Palestinian narrative, tends to be much more conscious of the Palestinians being victims and looking at Israel through a very different kind of lens. That's not the majority within the Hill. They are centrist Democrats who don't view things that way. Clearly, the Republicans don't view things that way. Overall, I would say there is a concern, even within this administration, about the behavior, the words, particularly of those like Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. They do resonate. They do have an effect here. But I think something else that tends to be overlooked is the reality that, what are we, the 34th week of protests every Saturday night in Israel? There is a recognition that there is a remarkable grassroots movement taking place in Israel that is a response to what is perceived by them, and clearly they're a very significant part of the country, perceived by them to be a threat to Israel's basic democratic identity. The reality of that kind of a grassroots movement, which could take place no place else in the Middle East, is one that is not ignored. While there may be differences with the current Israeli government, there is, I think, at the same time, this kind of appreciation for the depth of the Israeli democratic ethos, and it's reflected in this grassroots movement. So I wouldn't exaggerate that we're at some kind of a juncture in terms of U.S. support for Israel. I do think there is a level of interest. Elliott made a reference to the fact, I think every synagogue is very much affected by what's going on in Israel. I know it in my own synagogue, and I think it's kind of reflective of the larger Jewish community. There is concern about what is happening in Israel. There is concern about how it will come out. There is unease that the kind of polarization there, excuse me, that the polarization there is affecting Israel's cohesion, its potential for cohesion, its identity. But I don't see at this point yet that there's some kind of fundamental divide, especially as it relates to bigger issues, at least in foreign policy. I still think Israel is seen as the only democracy in the Middle East, and what we're seeing right now in Israel is a manifestation of that. Clearly how things come out, clearly what happens with regard to the Supreme Court decision soon, all this will weigh, and for someone like President Biden, who I said defines himself as a Zionist, it's clear he's uneasy about what is happening with the judicial reform process, and it helps to explain why there's been this uncertainty about when there will be a meeting between the president and the prime minister.
Well, just a quick follow-up, Dennis, because here around this panel, we have people, and we could go back to Reagan and even before, but Ambassador Eizenstat working in the Clinton administration, and Elliott Reagan, and then we have Clinton and Bush, and of course you with Obama, and Elliott was back in under Trump. But we all know how the pace of visits was in meetings between prime ministers and presidents. There hasn't been one in 8 months that he's been in office. I mean, just quickly, that's a message, right?
Well, I think it is a message. Let's put it in context, though, too. No Middle Eastern leader was even called by the president for the first 5 weeks of the Biden administration. The first one to be called was Prime Minister Netanyahu. This was an indication the Middle East was not a priority issue. It was a deliberate signal to say our focus in foreign policy is elsewhere. Now, it's ironic that we can now, and we'll talk about this, I suspect, later, it's ironic the administration is so determined right now to try to produce a breakthrough with Saudi Arabia, but I put that in the larger context of the competition with China. Anyway, the point is, yes, what we're seeing right now, it's not by accident.
Right.
Even if the Middle East was a lower priority, every administration, and I wrote a book on the history of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, looking at every administration had a very early meeting with the Israeli prime minister. Even an administration like George H.W. Bush, the first Middle Eastern meeting actually was with Shamir. So yes, every administration did it. The fact that it hasn't happened is not simply a function of the Middle East not having the same level of priority. The fact that it hasn't happened was obviously designed to be a signal.
Stuart, I want to turn to you for a moment. One of the issues that has come up, and maybe dive into a bit of the Jewish character of all of this. After all, we are at the Jewish People Policy Institute. One of the issues that's come up between Israel and the Jewish diaspora is about the law of return and some of the changes that some members of this current coalition want to do to the grandchild clause. From your perspective, how bad would such a move be?
Well, let me start by congratulating Yedidia Stern on his leadership of JPPI. Avinoam Bar Yosef is here, who was our founding chairman. And on a personal note, I would not be here with the credibility of speaking were it not for Rabbi Yitz Greenberg and Blue and their influence on my life. Now, I am an unemotional person, but I'm going to speak emotionally on this issue. In 1939, there were 17 million Jews in a world of 1 billion. Today, there are 14.7 million Jews in a world of 9 billion. We've never caught up with our loss in the Holocaust. Never. When Mengele made his selections, he didn't ask whether someone was Reform or conservative or secular or Orthodox or Haredi. If they were Jews, they were Jews, and indeed, if they were the grandchildren of one grandparent who was Jewish, they went into the ovens. And here we are talking about a law that would disenfranchise from Aliyah the grandchildren of a one grandparent Jew. We have to see ourselves as being not just the Jewish state of Israel, but the state of the Jewish people. We have to see ourselves as one family. Yes, a discordant family, a talkative family, a debating family, but one family with a common fate. And when we start proposing laws that divide us, this is a shanda, plain and simple. It's playing into our enemies. It's forgetting our own history. It's forgetting that historians say that one of the reasons that the Second Commonwealth fell was because of internal divisions, not external. Israel has been able to meet and beat every external foe. Peace treaties now, in which I was involved with Egypt, with Jordan, the Abraham Accords, and even with Iran and others, Hamas and Hezbollah, there are obviously still external threats, but Israel is stronger than ever. So it's now a question of internal cohesion. And if this law were to pass, it would be another stake in the relationship between the diaspora and Israel, which is already on shaky grounds. We have the issue of women of the walls. We have the issue of not accepting Reform and conservative conversions. This would be catastrophic. I don't think it's going to happen, but the mere fact that it's being proposed just adds fuel to the fire unnecessarily and, again, forgets our history and ignores the fact that we are one very small people in an ocean of 9 billion non-Jews. So I hope that when the government and the Knesset consider this, they will recognize these facts. The chief Sephardic rabbi, recently said that Israel is an Orthodox state. It's not an Orthodox state. It is a Jewish state with all the diversity. And anyone who knows anything about Jewish history knows that from time immemorial, we have always had diversity. We've had secular and Orthodox Jews. Much of our scholarship in Eastern Europe and Central Europe came both from religious and from secular writers. That's been our history, and that has to remain our history. And every single Jew, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, secular, has to be respected as every other Jew should be.
Thank you, Stuart. I want to shift gears for a moment. Elliott, Saudi Arabia is in the headlines. There's talk of a possibility of normalization. The Biden administration wants to move it ahead. We saw Palestinians now are talking to them. The Saudis are saying they're going to do stuff on behalf of and make sure there's concessions. What's your prognosis? Is this possible?
It's possible. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen partly because it's very complicated. There are so many moving parts. But I would like to take the argument a step further and say, I really wonder why it is in Israel's interest, or that of the United States, but let's take the Israel part, a defense treaty with the United States. In my view, part of the magic of Israel's very broad support in the United States has always been that Israelis say, we want to defend ourselves by ourselves. It's a version of the Churchill line, give us the tools and we will finish the job. A defense treaty with the United States, I worry, essentially means we want to start thinking about the situation in which Americans would be defending Israel. And I think that would actually be harmful to the support for Israel in the United States. Now, I wonder also, of course, about an American-Saudi defense treaty. But I just take one tiny piece of the U.S.-Israel, a defense treaty. Tell me the borders of the Israel that's being defended in that treaty. Not such a simple question, actually. There are other concerns in the United States about the Saudi part. One, apparently the Saudis want the right to enrich uranium. And that in itself is very controversial.
You know, I was going to ask you to follow up because today's the 4th. It's tomorrow at midnight, back when you were one of the key policymakers in the Bush administration, when Israeli Air Force jets flew to destroy Syria's nuclear reactor back in 2007. Tomorrow night is the anniversary.
There's a good book about that.
I've heard there's a good book. But can Israel live with Saudi enrichment, domestic enrichment, with American guarantees?
Yeah, I think the theory would be, look, Iran is enriching. It's the theory. It is inevitable that the Saudis, Emiratis, others say, wait a minute, we're American allies, so we can't and your enemies can? So the theory would be, if it's going to happen sooner or later, let's see if it can happen in a context that provides more protection for Israel. And then there's the defense treaty part, the other thing the Saudis apparently want. Again, what does it mean? A couple of years ago, there was an attack on Abqaiq, the main Saudi facility for exporting oil. Well, what does it mean? If the Iranians do that again, does the United States have to strike Iran? I think these are very complex matters, and remember, for a treaty, you need 67 votes in the Senate. It's a lot of votes. So I think I can be proved wrong, in a week. It's always very dangerous to make a prediction that can be proved wrong so quickly, but I think it unlikely, and I actually don't see it. I see normalization with Saudi Arabia as being obviously a great thing for Israel.
Right.
But this combination of defense treaties, I do not see as being a good thing.
Ruth, a former member of the IDF General Staff.
I want to add another aspect to what Elliott said. Yes, the deal with Saudi Arabia, if it materializes, and if it comes, we are looking down a very long road with very difficult complexities. But I want to bring our attention to something which, for me, is directly connected to the topic of our panel. Israel, Jewish democratic state, and we are again overlooking the immediate problem which is at our border, which is the Palestinian. Again, we will reach another chapter in the history of the State of Israel that somebody is paying something to the Palestinian for them to be quiet. Whether the dilemma that stand in front of Israel is the exact dilemma, I mean, these days, stop 30 years to the Oslo Agreement, and we can, and you know, some of the architects are here with us, and we can discuss whether this was a good thing or a bad thing, but the strategic dilemma that Rabin, may he rest in peace, was looking at is the exact strategic dilemma that we are looking at, which is if we want to continue and be a democratic and a Jewish state on all levels, then we need some sort of separation. Call it a state, call it an autonomy, call it a 100% or 50%. But we need some sort of a two-state solution in one paradigm or another. But this is the only paradigm that will help us continue to be democratic and Jewish state for the years to come. And I'm sorry that we are not dealing with this right now.
I agree with you on the need that for the country definitely to make some serious decisions, and that's something that sadly consecutive governments have avoided. But Dennis, I want to get your input on Saudi. The Palestinian track we know is stuck. Terrorism here is on the rise. Settlement construction is also on the rise, whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but we know how it's perceived by the Democratic administration currently in the U.S. What's your prognosis of normalization with Saudi Arabia?
I actually put it, I'm more optimistic than Elliott is. I agree with him that it's complicated, but I also think that the administration badly wants it. I think the Saudis, interestingly enough, also are quite serious about wanting it. And I think actually it relates to the issue that Ruth was raising. If you look at where we are between the Israelis and the Palestinians right now, there is like no prospect of any movement whatsoever. And obviously things are getting worse. The irony is that the Saudis will make the Palestinian issue part of the overall agreement, not because they're focused on the Palestinians per se, but because from MBS's standpoint, when he does this, it has to look different than the UAE. When he does this, there has to be something that draws others, like Indonesia, Malaysia, to follow suit. And it means that there has to be something for the Palestinians, not a state right now, because it's not possible. If you had a Palestinian state right now, it would be a failed state. But something that changes the realities on the ground in a significant way, and something that also doesn't preclude a two-state outcome. So it means there has to be a variety of practical approaches. There has to be a variety of issues connected to no annexation, but no creeping annexation. And this reality, ironically, creates a moment to unfreeze the situation with the Palestinians, not to end the conflict, because that's not possible now, but to transform it. So for me, there's an irony. That if you produce this agreement, this breakthrough between Saudi Arabia and Israel, brokered by the U.S., it will create a challenge for the current Israeli government. When I see Smotrich say there'll be no gestures to the Palestinians as part of a deal, there absolutely will be, or there won't be a deal. And again, not because the Saudis are preoccupied with it per se, but because they have their own reasons to want to show they did something. And so here I see the potential for unfreezing the situation with Palestine, not solving it, but unfreezing it, and potentially moving it in a different direction. So I'm hoping it'll take place, because if the moment is lost, I don't know what's going to change things. I see them on a pathway to deteriorate further and further.
Well, soon we'll be joined by former Defense Minister Benny Gantz. Maybe he's the solution to all of Israel's troubles, and we'll be able to ask him. But Stuart, I want to get your view for a moment of another issue, but first just on the Saudi issue. you know, you spoke with a lot of emotion before about one of the more radical changes that this government is looking to do. This would be a big gift from the Biden administration to Netanyahu, to the prime minister. Based on what, you know, what you're seeing, you're feeling, should Biden be doing this for Netanyahu? Because it would give him a massive boost.
Right now, the president is concerned about his own reelection more than he is about the prime minister's reelection. And this would be an enormous achievement, but more significant. It would really end once and for all the Middle East conflict. It would really embed Israel, as the Abraham Accords have begun to do, and Trump deserves credit for that, more fully. Getting the Saudis, who are, after all, the guardians of Mecca and Medina, on board, getting the Wahhabi influence out. Remember that almost every single person who participated in the 9/11 attacks was a Saudi. This would be an enormous achievement. It would transform the Middle East, and it's worth the sacrifice. It's something the administration very much wants to do. Jake Sullivan, who's the National Security Advisor, has gone to Saudi several times. He's been briefing Democratic senators. So it does have all the hurdles that Elliott mentioned, but these are all ones that can be overcome if there's a political will to do it. But to go back to Dennis's, this is a triangular issue. And even if there is an agreement between Saudi Arabia and the United States for enrichment, for security treaty, the other piece of it is that the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi, has to make a politically existential decision. Is it worth his legacy? And it would be a major legacy to have normalization at the expense of his coalition, because there's no way the coalition would stay together with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich.
So on politics, I wanted to ask you, there have been a lot of ideas over the years to involve diaspora Jews in the decision-making process here in Israel. What do you make of some of these ideas? Maybe that's a way to, you know, give honorary representation in the Knesset, create something like a sounding board for the president. Is this something that Israel should advance?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I think there should be, on the part of the Israeli government through its Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, a diaspora impact statement on any legislation that would have a direct impact, like, for example, ending the grandfather clause. There should be, but constructing a situation in which the diaspora is somehow directly involved in decision-making, even on those issues, would be nearly impossible. Who would represent the diaspora? I mean, right now, J Street has spent years trying to get into the Conference of Presidents of American Jewish Organizations. Half of American Jewry is unaffiliated with any synagogue or any organization. How would you deal with the Reform and Conservative and Orthodox community? Who would elect them? All of these are almost insurmountable hurdles, but there are major organizations that cut across at least the organized Jewish community. There's the North American Jewish Federation movement, which represents hundreds of federations across the United States. There's the Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations. There's the International Association of Jewish Jurists. There are organizations with whom the Israeli government should be in touch when they deal with
JFNA's Israel representative is here with us, Becky Caspi, so she's hearing what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, JFNA is as representative of American Jewry as any, but even there, it's a very diverse organization. And to start electing people to a council or let alone observer status really would cause more divisions than it would solve. But Israel should not get off on the cheap. It simply, and there is legislation that's been proposed by Yankelovich, the previous minister, a bill that would actually simply not involved but have the right to involve the diaspora in at least being heard. So there I think it is important that there be a effort by the Israeli government to use these organizations as sounding boards.
Right. Ruth, I want to shift gears.
Before you shift, may I address
Please.
that? I think that one of the big challenges that we have is to bring home to the Israelis the importance of the dialogue on every decision, dialogue with the Jewish diaspora, that every decision and every legislation that is taking place here in Israel affects the Jewish people at large. And in a sense, the fact that we are, the mandate that we got, the raison d'etre of the State of Israel, is being the Jewish homeland, the homeland for the Jewish people. That means that we have to take this into consideration. And I think that for most Israelis, unfortunately, we don't know enough, we don't care enough, and it's not enough to have a minister or
Right.
a ministry with that. Maybe we should think about a sort of an upper house, a Senate, a presidential committee where the Jewish people will be represented.
So
in this dialogue.
I do have to ask, because it's not the elephant in the room, but it's the signs that were in the room. Elliott here came under, people are protesting outside because a diaspora Jew, who's the chairman of an organization, is in their eyes involved in something that they don't think is a diaspora Jewish organization should be involved. So I'll push back on that idea to you, Ruth, and then Elliott, I want you to weigh in on that as well.
It's a sort of a dialogue. I was happy to see that. I was happy. I was happy to see.
Adoni.
I was happy to see, I'm sorry, Elliott, about that, but the fact that the democratic civil society of Israel have something to say, and it's saying it even in this room, I think that that's the beginning of a realization that what Israel does affect Jewish communities, and what Jewish leaders are doing affects Israel. It's a beginning. That's
Right.
not the way I would like to see it. I would like to see it more productive. But I think that this is a beginning.
Look, let me just add one other thing. When I was ambassador to the European Union, my late wife and I went to all the European countries, and you could always identify the synagogues and day schools because they had armed guards outside. And we always said, thank God we live in the United States and we don't have to worry about it. Now, I can tell you that every Shabbat, it'll happen on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, every major synagogue in the United States of America will have police. Many will have metal detectors. They have exit plans that Federation has been supporting, JFNA. This is transformative. And to the extent that the radical right here is engaging the kind of conduct only feeds this problem. It leads to greater efforts to sanction Israel. It leads to greater threats to American Jewry. So I think that it's very important that the Israeli government understand the impact of what it does if it really wants to be not just a Jewish state, but the state of the Jewish people.
Okay. Elliott, you want to respond to that?
Thanks. You will not be shocked that I'm a little less positive about the demonstration. I'm a little less positive about it in part because it's based on a lie that was told in Haaretz that the Tikva Fund, which I chair, is financing Kohelet. That is simply false. And all this is public information. So the fact that people are willing to show up, to make noise, to do banners without checking the public records to see the facts, this is not helpful to public debate in Israel. Now, you know how.
Please, sir.
Here is the.
Let's let Elliott finish his remarks,
Here's
please.
the problem on representation of, let's say, American Jews. Half of American Jews have never been to Israel. The figure rises and falls, it's 45%, it's 53%, half more or less. It's not for lack of money. Many of the people who've never been to Israel have been to Paris, been to London, is a lack of interest. Should those American Jews be represented here? Do they have the right to be represented in Israel's internal decisions if they lack the interest even once to come visit Israel? So I think it's impractical, and I think if we talk about a Jewish and democratic state, a state of the Jewish people does have, I think, to be governed by the people who live in it, who defend it, who pay taxes here, who vote here. That's not to disagree at all with the notion that the government of Israel should pay attention to what diaspora Jews think and to the impact on diaspora Jews of decisions that are made here. I don't think that the debate being held here is the explanation for the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States, or the rise, at least, of anti-Semitic acts in the United States. It's complicated. I don't think I know the answer for why. I would argue that probably President Trump deserves some of the blame for this, for the nature of the debate in the United States. But I don't think it's the Israeli debate that has really contributed to that.
Dennis, one of the things, I mean, already if we're talking on the Israel-U.S. relationship again, or diaspora relations when it comes to judicial reform, one of the comments that's often said by members of the Israeli government is to the Biden administration, this is a domestic issue, back off, right? This has nothing to do with U.S.-Israel relations. This has nothing to do with foreign policy. We're rebalancing our own separation of powers. But Biden hasn't backed off. Why is that?
I think he hasn't backed off because, ironically, because of his attachment to the state. When he says that the Democratic Party is not Scoop Jackson's Democratic Party, he worries that if Israel looks like it's becoming an illiberal state, that this really will have a huge impact on not just Democrats, but the U.S.-Israeli relationship. The pillar of U.S.-Israeli relations has always been shared values. During the Reagan administration, this was expanded to sort of recognize shared interests from a security standpoint in particular. But the truth is, it was always built on shared values. So if it looks like Israel is giving up some of those values, it's becoming a, quote, illiberal state, I think Biden in particular worries about what the impact that will be on the U.S.-Israeli relationship over time. Look, I wrote a book called Doomed to Succeed. It had an ironic title, meaning didn't matter how much administrations, U.S. and Israeli administrations messed up, it would always be okay in the end. But I flagged, and this was a book written back in 2015, I flagged a number of concerns. I said, literally, if you go back and you can check it, I said, if it looks like the Supreme Court is being weakened or judicial independence is being weakened, if it looks like illiberal laws are being passed, if it looks like there's absolutely no interest in producing a two-state outcome, that can have an effect on the relationship. So in a sense, I think what you see with Biden right now is a genuine concern that Israel not lose its fundamental democratic character, because it's a fear that if it does, what makes the U.S.-Israeli relationship special will also be lost.
Right. We have just a couple minutes left. Ruth, I do want to ask you, you were Doveret Tzahal, you were the IDF spokesperson, a member of the top IDF command for a number of years. The political military relationship today is under a huge test, I think maybe not in a way that I can recall in the last couple of decades. So first of all, how would you be managing that, right? And if you were still in uniform and you were the spokesperson for the military, how would you be managing the communication side? How would you be managing this relationship where every day we hear another, often Likud member, but other party members who are attacking IDF officers who are currently serving?
I think that we are at the lowest point we ever were. And each day I woke up and I think that that's it. It can't be any worse. And then I realize that I'm wrong. It can be worse. And it is not only what they are saying about the general and the military in the uniform, because it's mostly the IDF, but it's also the police, it's also the Shabak, the Mossad. I mean, there is a sort of a huge attack on the legitimacy of the people in uniform. And this is being done, I think. I don't look at each and every sentence that a member of Knesset or any political figure says, but I look at the overall picture. I sort of assemble the pixel. And the picture that I see is that there is a deliberate pursuit or a deliberate journey to kill or deconstruct, not kill, deconstruct each and every sacred symbols that we have here. It started with the legal system. It went on to the people in uniform, and it will not stop. I mean, we are touching upon the most difficult and the most painful issues in Israel. It's painting Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom HaZikaron and the bereaved families and the people who are serving in the military all of their lives. It's painting in picture of dispute and in picture of it's not ours. It's either you are with us or you are against us. It's like two trains colliding once against the other. And the question is not only what do we do. I can give my opinion about what can be done and what I should do, but I think that we need to put this on the table and understand that there is a deliberate effort to really deconstruct each and every symbol and each and every institution that we Israeli call ours. And the big divide that some people, what we are seeing right now is that the extreme forces and the extreme voices in the Israeli society from all sides, religious, ultra-religious and Orthodox, right and left, even men and women, even Israeli-born and not Israeli-born, and Israeli-born like myself in Algeria, and some others who were born in Poland. I mean, if someone is playing the extreme forces, extreme voices of the Israeli society, once against the other, and we need to find the agreement of the moderate voices, of the voices in the center, of the voices who are not extreme, who are saying, I'm willing to recognize that you are different than me. I'm willing to recognize that you are thinking different than me. And I'm willing to recognize that we have to be very careful. It's the third time that we have a Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. Let's not.
And they usually last about 70 years, so you know.
Okay, right. So we are really at the historical test of us. But
right.
With regard to the attack on the military, this is also playing on two other courts, not only inside Israel. It's playing, first of all, to a legal court, the ICC. If there are some changes in the legal system, as we are seeing now being prepared, this is exposing what certain ministers are saying, and even putting on the table really discriminatory statement, and even I would call it racist statement, then we are exposing our military and men and women in uniform to the ICC, to the criminal court in The Hague. This is one thing. And the second thing is that it's really harming the deterrence image of Israel.
Right.
This is hurting the strength, the military strength of Israel.
So just with a few moments left, I want to go just across the panel real quickly. Yedidia mentioned the book, which is behind us, A Jewish State with the 75 Perspectives. So when you think 75 years to the future, can you give me in 1 minute, Dennis, we'll start with you, optimistic, pessimistic, where will we be?
By my nature, I'm optimistic. And I look at what Israel achieved in the first 75 years. I do see it being challenged right now. But I also see even the nature of the response to the challenge as being a sign of hopefulness. It is extraordinary to me that you've seen 34 weeks of demonstrations with numbers of people, many of whom thought this could never happen in Israel, many of those who are demonstrating would never ever have demonstrated. I think that offers an indication that ultimately there is a kind of accountability and it will be provided and the system itself will ultimately survive.
Thank you, Dennis. Stuart?
In 75 years, Israel has defeated all of its major enemies and is strong enough to withstand those that remain. It has literally become the biblical land of milk and honey. It's made the desert bloom. It's using, as we drink here, water, 80% of our drinking water comes from the Mediterranean. It's sharing technology that's world-class all over the world. It's a military powerhouse. It has transformed this region, and now with the peace treaties and the Abraham Accords, it's ended its isolation, which will be final if we can get the Saudi peace done. However, that gives cause for optimism if Israel can maintain cohesion and unity of purpose, if it can maintain itself, as its founding document says, as a Jewish and democratic state in its fullness, if it can avoid the kind of erosion internally that led to the destruction of the Second Jewish Commonwealth. And I have to believe that with all the accomplishments that Israel has made, that it can do so. I think that the demonstrations, which are remarkable and involve many of my friends who have never been involved in such demonstrations, indicates a vibrancy for democracy. There are demographic changes, for sure, with the Haredi population, which have to be taken into account. But with everything that Israel has already done, I believe that it can now turn its attention to dealing with its internal divisions and hopefully have the same achievements as it has had externally.
Thank you. Ruth?
Israel is a miracle, no less than that, I think. And I'm saddened to see Israel turning from the wonder kid of the world to the problematic kid of the world. But I'm not pessimistic. I'm very optimistic, because I think that many people in Israel have realized that it's upon them, it's in their hand to not only voice their voice, but do something about this. And the extent to which the Israeli society is involved and has a say on the major issue that are perturbing or in Israel on our table, I think this is a good sign. I think that by our DNA, we know how to deal with disagreement. We know also how to reach accord and consent among us. I don't see the path to it yet. I'm still very worried, but somehow I'm still optimistic.
Okay. Elliott?
I'm not going to change the tone of optimism here. I think Israel has solved its major security problems with one exception, Iran. And we can hope very much over the next, certainly 75 years, I would hope for a lot less than that, to see the collapse of the Islamic Republic, which is certainly something the people of Iran want. And if that happens, Israel is not only integrated into the region becomes a far more peaceful place. One other point, which is we're just seeing now, maybe this decade, maybe the last, the tipping of the balance of population, where Israel has a larger Jewish population than the United States. And I do think something we are already seeing, and we will see clearly in the next 25, 50, 75 years, Israel will be absolutely clearly the center of world Jewish life.
Right. Okay, before I just bid farewell to our panelists, Yedidia would like to just say a few words to wrap up this session.
Okay, I don't want to wrap up the session. I want to say something as a host. What you saw today is an exercise. How to handle major disputes when all the sides are really sincere in their feelings. So how should we, JPPI, should deal with the issue? Elliott does not need me to protect him. He's as patriot as anybody else. We are so proud that he's a board member here. And I thank you for coming again. However, many people feel mistakenly, doesn't matter, but they feel so, that they want to express their disagreement with whatever is going on here. That's why we decided to find some kind of balance. And what you saw here is our humble try to maintain different aspects of the dispute. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just say, Benny Gantz will be joining us any moment, so we'll just, if you want to stay in your seats, if anyone maybe wants to ask anyone here a question, any questions from the crowd for any of our panelists? Stuart, before you head off, I think we have a moment or two. If you stay, if you got, we're happy to take a couple of questions. If anyone has, if you could just speak loud so we could hear. Any takers?
Good try.
Okay. If everyone could just be seated, Benny Gantz will be here any moment. Any quick question from anyone in the audience? We have like a minute or two. Moshe, please, very quickly and loud. Okay. Who are you asking? Stuart, you want to give a quick answer to that question? Very quick. Why support the two-state solution? But I'm told we have one quick minute.
I think there are two reasons. One, it's the only way to preserve a majority Jewish democratic state. And second, because biblically, 16 times it's repeated to treat the stranger, because remember, you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You have to live with 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank and 2 million and over 1.5 million in Gaza. They're your neighbors, for better or for worse. They may be bad neighbors, but the job is to try to make them better neighbors. And if you can't get a state initially, at least try to extend educational and economic opportunities so that they feel that they have a chance for a better way of life. To have a majority Jewish state, to have a continued permanent occupation of people who have no voice in their future, is not consistent with that value.
So I just want to thank Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat.